Hi, I'm James P. Friel.
And I'm Dean Holland. It's time to fasten your seatbelts, boys and girls.
That's right. If you're an entrepreneur who's wanting to take your business to the next level and have a bit of fun while getting cutting-edge advice on your business, marketing, and sales, welcome to Just the Tips, arguably the best podcast in the entire world. I guess that's good, right?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right. That was easy. That was the easiest thing we did all day.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Just the Tips. This is your host, James P. Friel. I am thrilled that you guys are here with us today. We are so excited for today's show. Everybody is here all at once. We've got Mr. Dean Holland, who just rode in on his white noble steed.
There we go.
Can't skip the trumpet. Fair for you, my fine bearded British friend. How are you today?
I'm doing amazing. How are you?
Good. I'm also joined by the lovely Melanie Parish, author of the book, The Experimental Leader, who's here today to talk with us about discovering your leadership style and how to create lasting change inside of your business. Melanie, welcome to the show. I know you didn't ride in on a horse, but it's okay. We're happy that you're here nonetheless.
I love riding horses, so I wish I had. That's awesome. It's
Next
great
time.
to be here.
Next time.
Next time.
Yeah, I know you thought, it wasn't appropriate to come into this show on a horse, but turns out it is. So
apparently I have some pony envy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, we're ready to, let me back up. Most entrepreneurs, I don't think, start out by thinking of themselves as leaders. I think they start out by thinking of themselves as product creators, people who offer a service, opportunistic seekers, somebody who's trying to capitalize on something. And somewhere along the way, you're like, wait a second, everybody's looking at me to make these leadership decisions. Like, what the heck happened to the good old days?
Run!
Get on the horse and ride away.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what happened to the good old days when, I could just be getting everything done myself, or maybe I had a small group of people and we were just, kind of everybody knew what everybody else was thinking. And now I'm in an environment where there's more people, there's more customers, there's more money, but there's also more problems. And I'd love your take on the transition. And this probably will go deep into this, but what's most important in the transition for a business owner, an entrepreneur who finds themselves becoming a leader?
I think this is a really, this is like so near and dear to my heart, by the way. I love this conversation. I've been an entrepreneur for a really long time. The beginning of my coaching practice was all with entrepreneurs. I love entrepreneurs. I love the way they think. And I love startups too. Like, I love that there's this magical feeling in a startup when you think to yourself in the morning, oh, I should offer this to customers. And then in the afternoon, you offer it to a customer and they buy it.
Yeah.
And you're laughing.
Pretty magical.
You're laughing, but that's that magical time. It's like the lemonade stand outside. Hey, Mom, can I create a lemonade sign? A lemonade stand. And then you bypass R&D, you bypass all the parts of business, and you go straight to marketing and selling. And our businesses get more complex when we're successful. And I think we all dream of those days where we had an idea and we were able to sell it really fast.
Yeah.
And I think when we're successful and we start to try to duplicate ourselves, that's the moment that we become leaders. We're leading the business before that. We're just only leading ourselves. So there's not much friction.
Yeah.
And so, but that moment where we start to duplicate ourselves, you get left with this whole set of skills that you need on how to grapple with that. And I think that's the complexity of new leadership, of trying to figure out I often think of the image of, that game you played when you were a kid and you're like, you have your friends sit in front of you and then you feed them at the table. That's what I
don't know if I ever played that game.
Well, maybe it was a girl game. I don't know. But you would like, you put a bib on them and then you try to like, you can't see the food. So you're trying to cut the food with a knife and fork. And you're trying to find their mouth, but you kind of miss their mouth. I feel like that's sort of the heart of that new leadership for really for anyone, but mostly for entrepreneurs. Like it's really complex for entrepreneurs.
Why is it so hard? And I know you're putting emphasis here on it's really hard for entrepreneurs. Is it hard for everybody, but it's harder for entrepreneurs, or like what's your experience with this?
Yeah, I think it's harder for entrepreneurs. Often I have clients who are entrepreneurs who've never worked in an organization before. So they've never gotten to see how someone else does it. So they don't have any prototypes.
Well, it's actually sorry to jump in, but it's fascinating that you would say that, because one of my close friends I've known since school, since we were like 12 years old, he's not entrepreneurial in any way, shape or form. He's very much a manual labor guy, and he loves that. He does what he loves. But I often have conversations with him to get his insight into to get his help, because I've only ever really had like 2 or 3 jobs, between the ages of like 16 and 20 or something like that. And as weird as it might sound to some, there's a lot I don't know about being, an employee and working within a company. So I often have to talk to him to get that perspective. So it's fascinating that you say those difficulties around that area.
Yeah. And I like to say I'm completely unemployable at this stage in my life. I have way too many ideas. I want to move too fast and I communicate terribly. And those are entrepreneurial challenges in general. We learn different things as entrepreneurs. And so I do think the challenge is we don't have good role models as entrepreneurs. And so often what that might mean is that we might look around for who we thought was a good leader. And often those role models, the things that we think were good leaders, were people who were either like super dominant personality types who told people what to do all the time. And that works really well, like in a flood, but not so well in a company, because it sort of thwarts ideas.
Right.
And then the other kind of leader we're really attracted to is what I call a charismatic leader or a charming leader. We're attracted to their charm, but they're not much more effective than that person who tells people what to do. They just manipulate people to do what they want. So both of those things are still missing the friction of shared ideas. And if we can have shared ideas in an organization, then we start to utilize many people's brains instead of just the leader's brain. And that's where we start to see that effect of synergy and more than the sum of its parts happening on a team or in leadership. But there's a lot that goes behind that as a leader to create an environment where people's ideas flourish.
So what do you think are, before we get into how to elevate your leadership game, how would you define the characteristics of a good leader?
Ooh, good question.
Well, it's sort of the foundation. I got my, kick at the can when I wrote my book, The Experimental Leader. And in the process of writing it, editors, made me really drill down on, what is this? What are the characteristics of this leader? Weirdly, it's not a lot of behaviors. It's neutral. Like getting to neutral as a leader, I think is one of the most complex, but one of the most powerful that you can do as a leader.
What do you mean by neutral? Like, what does that mean?
It's that you don't react to the things that are happening around you as a leader, and that you are able to take things in, ponder them, maybe think thoughts or ask questions, but then hand things back to your team. So you become almost a conduit you become someone who might set direction. That may be an important outgoing message that you would have. But much of the time of a good leader is spent helping people move their own tasks forward. So say you have a team of 10 people. How is everyone doing on their tasks? And certainly as a leader, you don't want to be assigning the tasks, because that's the straight path to being a micromanager.
Okay, so I can hear all the questions that are going through people's minds. If I don't assign the tasks, who assigns them?
Yeah.
So setting the direction, great. Then there seems to be a gap between setting the direction, which is sort of the vision, and then there's a planning phase. So are you making a distinction between leadership and management with that, kind of frame of reference, or do you have a different way of looking at it?
Yeah, I feel like, somebody in leadership, the leadership world's going to smack me down for saying, I don't think there's that big of a difference between leadership and management. Leaders do both. Like you have to make sure there's sort of a difference between strategic tasks and operational tasks. And I think of operational tasks as being more managerial, and the strategic tasks as being more leadership, like you're setting a big picture direction. But one thing I do think is really important in this one little tiny strata is, when you ask that question, well, who's assigning the tasks if you're not assigning the tasks? I actually think this is one of the places that new leaders can get the most leverage if they can figure out that one little tiny place of leadership. It's not about reading all the leadership books out there. It's on focusing on that one place. How do you pass the tasks? There's a couple of things that I think are really important in that one little piece. One is, how are you briefing what you're passing? And are you passing a big enough bucket? So I think about buckets in leadership a lot. If you're passing a task that doesn't attach to anything, you probably haven't passed a bucket. So for example, social media. Have you passed the social media bucket to someone where they start to have ownership and ideas? Or are you saying, I want you to make 5 Facebook posts every week. I want you to make, 3 LinkedIn posts every week. Because then they haven't thought about the whole, which leaves you as the leader as the only person thinking about the whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What if you have, and I know especially earlier on in my business, it didn't seem possible that some of the people that I had the capacity to think about the whole. I would say, okay, you're handling social media, and then it would be like, I don't know what to do. Like, just tell me what to do, right?
So we need to hire well. Like, we certainly need to look for people, like both hire well, and then you can also test things to see how well they work.
So is that sort of the essence of what you mean by the experimental leader? Like, what do you mean by the experimental leader? I'd love to drill in on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, the idea of the experimental leader is anytime we want change to happen in an organization or a business, or in our personal lives even, we're leading our own lives all the time. If we want change to happen, then we're going to try something new.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, we can see that as we've decided we're going to do that new thing, but really in that moment in time, that's an experiment. Right. If I decide with my husband, I'm feeling disconnected and I want more connection, and I say, can we try date night? We're trying an experiment. I have no idea at the beginning of that whether that's going to make me feel more connected.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
But if I know it's an experiment, I can think back in 4 weeks. And if he's on his phone during dinner, every time we have a date night, I'm not going to feel more connected. I could cancel date night and say, that didn't really work. That was an experiment that didn't work. Could we try going for a walk? So then I'm trying a new experiment because the data I collected didn't give me the result that I thought it might.
Could we go for a walk on a tall bridge where I could throw your phone off?
Yeah.
Just saying, that might be
forwards to fix the problem.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Can we go skydiving, but we don't jump out of the plane, we just throw your phone out of the plane.
If that doesn't work, you can join it as well.
My husband's not like addicted to his phone during dinner. So for me, it usually works. But notice how there's a moment where you try something new and then you collect data and then you think about, what did you learn? So that's sort of the heart of being an experimenter. The other thing is, and less in entrepreneurial context, more in large corporations, people live and die by their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to go all in for an idea and get a big budget and then roll it out. And then if it fails, they failed with their idea. But if we know it's an experiment, I'm sure you've experimented a million times with your podcast. You tried something and you went, gosh, did that work? Did that not work?
Well, I dare say that it's still an experiment, to be honest.
Yeah, I think podcasts are an amazing experiment.
My co-host is an experiment. I'm still trying to determine whether it makes sense to have him as a co-host.
But no, I really love your approach here and the way you're explaining that, because I can tell you one thing, looking back on myself, that in the past, I haven't viewed certain decisions I've made, probably in life and business. But if we just focus on business, like when I've made a decision, it's almost like that's it now, and I've had times where I've stupidly, let's just say as it is, stupidly hung on to this thing, because it was like, I made this decision. This is where we're going. That's the decision I've made now. And 6 months, 12 months down the line, in reflection, it's like, whoa, that decision was bad. Like, what do we do? And it's like, well, let's go back to when it wasn't bad. And it's like, whoa, if I'd have viewed it as an experimental decision from the beginning, I'd have probably not been closed off to reacting faster to it not being the right move. So I think that's fantastic.
Well, and we have words for that, like sunk costs and all sorts of things. Like we have language to describe that thing that you're describing, but describing it as an experiment up front allows us to think, oh, what's the tiny move? Like how do we prototype that? How do we do it in a safe to fail way? How do we, what can we do so that we get data quickly and then we reevaluate quickly and then we move it forward so that when we actually start to invest money, we know it works. People do this with Facebook advertising all the time. They try to get proof of concept before they throw, hundreds of thousands of dollars at it.
Yeah.
So there's ways that we already do this pretty well, but we don't do it universally in our businesses.
Yeah, so, it's very true.
I think this whole idea of experimentation is something that I've embraced for quite a while, having been, an engineer in college, and I took all these lab courses, physics lab, chemistry lab, this lab, that lab, and everything. And everything was like, well, here's my hypothesis. Here's what I think we could do.
That's right.
Right. And then, it's like, have a hypothesis, conduct an experiment, measure, evaluate, and then you have another hypothesis, right? So it's this kind of constant cycle. And I love what you're talking about in terms of taking that mindset and applying that to the way in which you run your business, because the truth is none of us have any real idea how anything is going to happen. And to like pretend that we do is either ignorant or arrogant. And to me, this idea of experimentation makes a ton of sense. So in terms of leadership styles and how do we, kind of move, use this word neutral, which I think is an interesting word to use, move towards this center of where we're not claiming to have all the answers, but we're also hungry with curiosity to figure out how we discover the answers. What's the best way for somebody to start doing this, whether their company's big or small, and kind of some of the tips. This is just the tips after all. So
I was just about to say, what's the name of the show? I nearly forgot for a moment.
I know you did. That's why I'm talking about experimenting with a co-host who doesn't forget the name of the show.
Well, I think that I think it's just really it's really important to think about that neutral, that it doesn't mean that you give up standards. Neutral doesn't mean lack of standards. And I think as you're holding the experiments, if you picture your job as the leader is to hold the idea of experimentation on your team, and then to hold them accountable to all of those things that we talked about, like, are you collecting data? How will you know if it worked? What did you learn? That's the push that you push for. So you don't push your ideas about them on your team. You're pushing the process. And that fuel, there's a guy named Eliyahu Goldratt who wrote The Goal. And he always said that management attention was the biggest bottleneck in North American business. I think it's all business, but he that was his quote. And
South
and
Americans
I think
have it totally figured out.
Yeah, and Europeans, yeah.
Right. Like, we don't
But,
deal with those problems anymore, you North American peasants.
So yeah, so I think that paying attention and then briefing well. So are you giving really good guidelines? Because what I'm learning is that the better you can brief, the more clearly you're passing the measurement of the experiment to your team. So instead of passing them a concept, you're actually saying, I want this, and I want it to look like this, and I want it to have these guidelines, and I want us to measure it in these ways. Measurement's hard. Measurement's super hard.
People resist measurement because it's so hard.
It's so hard, and you have to set up a process, and then you have to think about it, and you have to go. I really think that any of those steadiness tactics that, make us go and do something over and over again, week after week, and they're kind of boring until you go, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, this is working. Until that moment, it's really boring. But it sure does help with spend if you know something is working.
Well, and I think it also, because there's been multiple evolutions of my teams and the different businesses that I've run and the businesses that I've worked with. And I think there's a constant need for helping people understand this frame of experimentation, right? Because everybody brings their own sort of personal insecurities to the business. And like, what if I'm wrong? I'm like, well, I don't know that you are right or wrong. And what is right or wrong? There's only like what gets it done. And so there's all these different conversations to have. So the briefing, I think, is absolutely a clear step. What are we going after here? Why are we doing this? How do we measure success? And then doing it until you actually have the valid data to be able to measure whether it's successful or not, and then re-hypothesize or prove your original hypothesis. What do you say about communicating more of the cultural impacts of this experimental approach to the people that are working with you? How do you manage that aspect of things?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Do you mean like, how are you communicating that experimenting is important in the organization?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you get people bought into this idea?
Yeah, I suppose you're saying, like, how do we get everyone on board in that frame of mind? This is how we operate. We're an experimental, we take this approach, and this is how and why. I suppose that's what you're getting at.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly what I'm driving at.
I find that people adopt this language pretty easily and fairly slowly. Like, they get what you're talking about. If you say, oh, well, what's the next experiment we're going to try? They know exactly what you mean. There's no language that you have to roll out. But what you hold is that, okay, well, can we check in a week? And then you schedule the meeting for the check-in. So it's your job to do those check-in meetings, to pay attention that you've given someone a new concept. They are not going to walk away and do that concept and start experimenting and do it perfectly all on their own.
Right.
So what I find is that I often am having, when I pass a bucket, so say I pass a bucket of something to a team member, I pass that bucket and I share the target condition.
So give us an example.
Sure. We have an email nurture series that we're working on.
Okay.
31 emails. My target condition is those, we just shifted our strategy a little bit. I need all those 31 nurtures updated and loaded into Active Campaign by next week, by Friday, by Tuesday, whatever the deadline is. And then I become a resource. So it's like, well, what are you missing? So the next question is, what obstacles are preventing us from getting there?
Okay.
And what do we need to try? So the other thing about being fostering experimental leadership and passing buckets to your team is you don't walk away from them. You're a team member. You're a resource for them as the leader. Your voice doesn't get lost when you pass it. It's just a difference in who's asking what from whom. So my team members come to me all the time because they need something from me. They need my voice somewhere. They need me to create content. They need me to prove content, whatever it is. I don't disappear from the team, but I'm not in charge of delivery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The delivery stays with the bucket.
So how do you make the distinction then for them in terms of the experimental approach with this idea of a bucket versus the task that you talked about earlier?
I mean, some places I don't talk about this with my team. I just I say they're in charge of the bucket, and then I name the bucket's name something. But it becomes their deliverable. I think most leaders shouldn't have very many deliverables unless they're for somebody above them in a larger organization. In an entrepreneurial setting, if you have a team of 5 people, if you cannot be responsible for anything but kind of customer delivery, if you do that, or whatever makes the money, sales, marketing, wherever you need to be in the business, if you can make everything else somebody else's deliverable, you free up your time to focus on the bottlenecks of the business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's a whole other concept. It's like they all just kind of fall.
Right. Right. So what's the what are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the things that people need to look out for when, transitioning from, like you said, there were these 2 types of leadership styles at the beginning, right? There's like the dictatorial, like gun to the head sort of one. And then there's the charming, charismatic, but I'm still just going to manipulate you sort of one. What are some of the pitfalls when people are like, okay, well, maybe that's not the best approach to developing my team, to developing my business, all that. And they buy into this concept of experimental leadership. What are some of the things that can go wrong when trying to make that transition for people?
Well, I find just in general, if somebody as a leader tells me they're frustrated, that word has become a real signal for me. I feel so frustrated that something's broken in the process. The work isn't flowing well. So that word is like, to me, if I hear a client say, I'm frustrated, I'm so frustrated.
Red flag.
It is a huge, waving red flag to me, because they're expecting something to happen in their team or organization or business that isn't happening the way they dreamt it would.
Yeah.
And they're taking it in, and that frustration tells me they don't know how to act from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's the red flag. That doesn't answer your question about what to do if you feel that.
Okay, so let's talk about that now.
I mean, don't let him bully you into it, though, Melanie. You could equally just say, I'm not going to tell you that.
I'll tell you. I mean, I think that you dive into the process. So you continue to let your person, you don't solve the problem. That is the biggest pitfall, is you see something broken, you feel that frustration, and you think, I'm just going to fix it because I can fix it real fast. Well, when you fix it real fast, number one, you become the deliverer of that forever. And your team member doesn't learn what you know. So when you feel frustrated, my guess is what you need to reframe is to, what do I need to invest in so that I won't feel frustrated anymore? Now, I don't know what that is, because that could be a variety of things, but you have a dream that someone will accomplish a task for you that they're not capable of accomplishing. That's what that frustration tells me.
Right.
What can you do to skill them up? So I love one-on-ones and ways that people look for how they can skill their team up. I think it's super important to be thinking about all the time. How do the person that you hire today may not be able to do everything today, but what are you teaching them each week so that a year from now you have a super skilled person on your team, as opposed to you've done their work for them for a year and you've hated every minute of it.
Right. And what do you do? What do you do when the stage is set where you've been trying to skill somebody up and just like, this is the wrong person and I need to invest in a new person.
Done.
How do you make where do you make the call between like, okay, like invest versus cut them out and then invest in a new person?
If I don't see learning, that's my key. Like if I'm having the same, I have very low tolerance from the same conversation over and over. I also, if they become the bottleneck in the business, like I cannot move the business fast enough because they're a bottleneck.
Mhm.
And that means they're intolerable as like, I can't have somebody who's the bottleneck. So we either need to move them to where they're not the bottleneck. So if growth is my goal, and most businesses growth is their goal, if they're in the way of growth, then they're a bottleneck and they have to either go or move.
Yeah.
I will say, having been a, executive and business coach for 22 years, most people fire too slow.
I think I agree with that.
Me included.
Yeah.
I'll own that fully.
I think this is one of those leadership skills, isn't it? Like how many times do you get put in that situation really until you have to be put in that point? Like, it's not a nice situation, is it? Like I struggle with that.
Which is why
you do, James.
What's that?
I don't imagine you do.
No, from time to time I do.
You do.
Absolutely. No, it's a challenging one, which is why I'm asking about the way in which you look at that criteria, how you evaluate, right? Because I think all of us as leaders want to be or feel that we're being as objective as possible, right? Where we want to move at 120 miles an hour. Most people don't move at 120 miles an hour. And so it's like, okay, fine. But how do I set realistic expectations for what can be accomplished? And at what point do I cut my losses and move on to a different approach? Because that's part of the experiment too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's not just experimenting with a Facebook ad campaign. It could be experimenting with different people and different roles on the team.
Yes. Well, and when you're new, if you add a bunch of team members at once, you don't know what's not working.
Yeah.
So the more established, the more of these things you work through as you develop into a business, away from startup, it becomes more clear. I think about restaurant openings, and you think about hiring for a restaurant, and really the only people available to hire are the people that aren't gainfully employed.
Mm-hmm.
So your whole workforce is people who couldn't get employed before you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take whatever's left.
The sign on the door. Hey, not able to get a job anywhere else? Come in here. We're hiring.
Yeah.
It's like the poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty by Emma Lazarus. It's like, give me your tired, your poor, your struggling masses, like whatever it is. It's like, we'll just, come on, we're hiring.
You've just described every startup.
Yeah.
Like with that poem. So in the beginning, if we are new to hiring, and especially if we've hired our friends, we probably
which never ever happens.
No,
I did it this year. I did it this year. It's been a great decision, but this happens. So, we need to think about being able to let those people go quickly, like even more quickly in a startup. We might have gotten it wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to also have good recruitment strategies for how are we looking around to find, great team members that, so that we can hire people who are moving from one job to another. Because really the best workforce is probably often highly employed.
Yeah. Yeah. You almost have to like forcefully pull them out of where they are.
Yeah. Or make it become really appealing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One or the other. Carrot or a stick of some kind.
That's where the culture stuff comes in, right? Like, oh, that's why, you might want to go to that place that's experimenting well and developing their people and their, you're going to be a better employee because you're going to know so many more things because of this process. In 2 years, you're going to be a really skilled up employee. That's super attractive for hiring.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting way to look at that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think everyone has different reasons, don't they? And I think this is sometimes what I've struggled with, because like, my reason to move would be only for the money, I guess. If I had a job, I'd be like, well, if you pay me more, I'm going to come to you because I want to make more money. But my experience since employing others is like, I don't think most people are that way.
Well, and I would argue that at the extreme, you're not even that way. Like we could
as an employee, I think I was.
Well, I would say like there's an amount that you're unwilling to tolerate no matter how much you're getting paid. You're like, I freaking hate the people that I work with. I hate the environment. I'm not excited about what we're doing. And at some point, you might do it for a short period of time, but I think at some point it like, you even had this with your business, right? You didn't like the customers that you had.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you completely reinvented everything.
Yeah, it's true.
And it wasn't because you weren't making good money, because you were killing it.
True. Very true. Yeah. Yeah. Well observed.
All right. I'm just, kind of checking boundaries here and making sure that we're keeping each other honest.
Yeah. I had a job that I took that I did sales for an IT consulting firm. And we were knocking it out of the park, and giant sums of money were showing up in my bank account because I sold them into a Fortune 50 company, and my friends were starting to say things like, "Melanie, you've changed. Are you okay?" Because it was so toxic and so horrible. And it was so hard to leave because the money was so good. Right. And my soul was just dying.
Yeah,
so, but that's true for the people we employ too, is we can see their souls die if we don't develop them, if we don't spend time with them, if we lose faith in them, we owe it to them to release them into the wild so that they can find someone who does have faith in them.
I 100% agree with that. And I also think it goes both ways. It's right. It's like, look, it's not a good fit. But just because it's not a good fit doesn't mean you suck, and it doesn't mean we suck. It means it's not a good fit, right? Not all parts are meant to fit the same thing. And by acknowledging that and being honest about what's real, then you get the opportunity to go find out where you are a good fit, and we get the benefit of finding somebody to come in here who's a good fit for us. Yeah. And it is a huge win, although a very uncomfortable conversation, in my opinion, because most people make it wrong. Like something must be wrong.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong. It's just, it's not working, right? Like you don't put certain ingredients in a milkshake, right? You're not like putting pesto in your milk. Like, well, does pesto suck? No, I freaking love pesto sauce.
Oh, I love pesto.
I made the other night. Yada went out. She had a dinner with somebody, and I was just like, what am I going to do tonight? And I was like, I could do Uber Eats, or I could DoorDash, or whatever. I freaking made a single serving of homemade pasta and homemade pesto sauce. And I had a bowl of pasta with my homemade pesto sauce, and it was amazing. But I digress big time. I'm a foodie. But but you don't put pesto in a milkshake because that's disgusting. Right. And it's like, it's not that ingredient's not a good fit for that recipe. It's not because the pesto is bad or the milkshake is bad. It's that they don't work. And I think when we're in these situations with people and having to have these difficult conversations, we don't have to vilify anybody or anything.
Right.
And I think it's natural tendency, because like human behavior has like this whole like us versus them, and good and evil and all that. And that's fine on a paradigm level for certain things. But when we're talking about being practical, hey, we tried it. We took this experimental approach. It doesn't work. Go find something that does work, and we're going to find something that works for us. Boom. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like,
unlike any other relationship.
Yeah.
It's like, look, we don't have to hate each other. It just didn't work. Let's part ways.
Well, and I think one of the disconnects right now that, people miss, is around technology. Like, how skilled up on technology. My little tiny company, oh my gosh, we have so many tools. Like, we all roll our eyes. We carefully add them, but we solve problems with technology, with Trello and Kanban boards and Miro and diagrams and, Active Campaign and automation. And like, even in my little tiny coaching company, we do that. And so if we get somebody who goes, what? I can't get on Zoom, like, they're not going to be a good fit for our culture. So I'm going to know that really fast.
Yeah. They're like, where is the filing cabinet and the fax machine? You're like, what? Really?
Yeah.
No.
So I actually think
like the Mad Men era called, and they need your filing skills back. Like, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, I had an assistant like that who used to be really good at making file folders. And it just wasn't a big need for my business.
What is being really good at making file folders look like?
Oh my gosh, she had this like old school technology that printed out these labels. So I still have files. She was with me like 15 years ago, and still I have files that are perfectly labeled. It was super expensive.
That she made them well, then, can you?
Yeah, that's right.
They lasted 15 years. Like, why would I get rid of one of those labels? They all are the things I needed, but they weren't the bottleneck in my business. So it was expensive to have her doing that instead of solving the problems that would help us scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder right now how many of the bad hires have a technology component to them. I don't know. I'm just
I bet it's considerable. I bet it's considerable because generally people who are super flexible with technology can kind of find a way to make some stuff work.
Yeah.
And people who don't get it, it's harder to do that. That's an interesting question though. I know we've got to move on to our news segment. But before we do, is there anything that you'd like to add, ask, or comment on, or otherwise insult me, Dean?
Well, I thought we were going to line up. Now you mentioned insulting. I thought there's like 10 people just walked by. They're like, oh, I've been waiting for this moment.
This is the moment I've been waiting for my whole life.
No, I think this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you, Melanie. I think, to me, the big takeaway that I'm taking away from this, as simple as it sounds, is literally just the word experimental.
Yeah.
It's like that approach, that philosophy. For me, just even saying the word just puts a different perspective on everything. It's because I think it would be fair to say that I have been described by many as an all or nothing kind of guy. It's like I'm all or nothing. I'm either not doing it at all, or I'm in, and like that's it. Everything's going to happen because I'm that invested. But I think that gets me into problems sometimes because it doesn't give me that opportunity to see this as something that isn't permanent, that can be reversed or changed, or we can alter if it's not playing out the way that I thought. And I think it sounds so simple just saying that word, like, oh, this is an experiment. But I think it changes everything so significantly. So no, I want to thank you for sharing that. I know I don't care about the listeners right now. That's helped me. So
that's great.
Cover your ears, everybody.
But no, in all seriousness, I think that is such a powerful thing. So yeah, I thank you for sharing it. It's been amazing.
Yeah, I echo that. I think that this idea is worth really drilling into and, investing. And like I said before, this experimental approach and the mindset and the thought process behind that is definitely something that I've had years of experience with, but even some of the distinctions and the nuances and like, why are we doing this exactly the way that we're doing it and everything that we've talked about here today, I think even illuminates that this isn't one of these things where you cross a finish line. It's like all of a sudden I'm an experimental leader.
No.
Right. It's an ideal that you keep driving towards and getting better at. And it requires consistency and commitment. And I really, really appreciate you bringing that to the show today.
Yeah. It helps you breathe. It like changes the air you breathe when you start to have the language of experimentation in your organization.
Absolutely. So obviously, anyone who's interested in this should get their hands on a copy of the book, The Experimental Leader, by Melanie Parish. Is there anywhere else that people should go if they want to find out more about you or what you're up to, follow you, learn more, that sort of thing?
Well, I'm out there, and The Experimental Leader is everywhere, but Actually, I will be happy to give all of your listeners a copy of my book if they go to book.experimentalleader.com. They'll get a copy of my book. I also have a new leadership program for new leaders. And if you get a copy of the book, we'll tell you all about our leadership program too in our follow-ups. And I'm just really excited to share the material in this book. And I think it changes people's lives. So I'd love to share it with your listeners.
Well, that's super generous. That's amazing. Yeah. So if you guys want to get a copy of the book, I know I'm going to be getting a copy of this. Sounds awesome. And go to book.experimentalleader.com. Is that the right URL?
Perfect. Yep. That's it. That'll take you right there.
Awesome. Well, that's super generous, Melanie. Thank you.
Wait, sorry. I gave you the wrong one. It's digitalbook.experimentalleader.com. You'll get a book, but you'll have to pay for it at book.experimentalleader.
Okay. Digitalbook.experimentalleader.com.
Yeah. That'll get you a free one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But go to the other one if you want to pay for it. Anyway, we're all good here. Thank you so much, Melanie. Really appreciate you being here. Yeah. All places where books are sold. And if you ever happen to have Dean over to your house, fun. He'll hide copies of his book inside of every cupboard. Like literally, we are still finding them like Christmas tree needles a year after he was here. So be careful if you do that.
I love it.
Yeah. So thank you guys for listening. We're going to go to a commercial break. We're going to be right back with the news. And thanks again, Melanie. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Cheers. All right, you guys, we're interrupting this incredible episode to bring you a very important announcement. And that announcement is the new Just the Tips members area. What? We've created a members area that has trainings right out of the gate from Dean and I on our best strategies to help you grow your business. And many of our guests that we've had on the show have offered to put some of their best stuff inside the members area to help you guys have access to all sorts of content that'll help you grow your marketing, grow your sales, make sure you're staying on top of your business, and you can work on your business, not in your business, get more results in less time. I can't even like the reason you don't even hear Dean right now is he's galloping around the studio on his horse from sheer excitement. Dean, can you please stop galloping for 1 second and tell our good-natured listeners what's going on?
Whoa there, horse. So if I can slow this thing down, there's only one place you got to go to get all this good stuff, and that is jttshow.com. That's jttshow.com. It's all free, and I think you're going to love it.
We will see you guys on the inside of the new Just the Tips members area, jttshow.com. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. All right, now we can dispense with that nonsense. Yeah, make sure you guys check out jttshow.com. We got lots of goodies in there for you guys. I thought that was really a really refreshing approach that she took.
I agree. That what I just said there, at the end, like I think it really does, like as simple as that sounds. I always think some of the simplest concepts are often the best. I think just making that shift from like, okay, I've made a decision and this is what we're going to do, compared to like, hey, I've thought about an idea. Let's run it as an experiment and see how it goes. Like, just a small tweak to it, but it opens up a completely different possibility, doesn't it? It's like, oh, how's the experiment going? Rather than, oh yeah, forget that decision that I already made. It's done.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think it also, to a certain extent, takes the pressure off of people feeling like they have to come up with a perfect idea, the right idea. And we don't know anything until it's market tested, right? Until we get real
unless
feedback.
You get it right, in which case you then say, I knew it would work.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And you never let people forget about that time that you knew it would work.
Indeed.
So I thought that was really good. I did want to dive into a couple newsworthy items that I think are kind of interesting. One, have you been following this whole Suez Canal situation?
It's funny you mentioned. So I vaguely heard, but I didn't really understand anything about it. And then I just happened to be, I sometimes will, when I'm eating lunch, I'll watch a few bits on YouTube, and it happened to be covered, just vaguely touched upon in this video I watched. And it showed this map that was like zoomed out with like, it had dots for the ships. So, I mean, I might be jumping ahead on what you're about to say, but I was like,
No, it's just a fascinating story.
what is this? Like this network of boats that are just like gridlocked to either end of this like canal or something. It was insane.
Well, this one, 1,300 feet long, this cargo ship.
Isn't it like the largest in the world?
Well, it's got to be one of them or something like that. I don't know, like all of the details, but it's kind of reminds me of clearly that was a bottleneck. I think I read they just got it released or whatever, so that it's dislodged and commerce can continue. But the cost of having that thing in the way from the free flowing activity that needs to happen in that canal, I started thinking about it, and obviously we all see these analogies the way that we see different things in the world, but it's an interesting thing, especially on the back of what we were just talking about with Melanie, in terms of you as the business owner being a bottleneck in your business, right? And all of the things that can't happen because you don't have the necessary bandwidth to make everything happen. And you're kind of like that freaking 1,300-foot cargo ship just lodged in the middle of the business, right? And everyone's like, man, like we got to get this done, or there's customers who want in, or there's all these different things that are happening, but you put yourself as a bottleneck. And it's very much the same way that this cargo ship was bottlenecking the entire Suez Canal, costing everybody billions and billions of dollars. You as a bottleneck in your business are costing yourself maybe not billions of dollars, but certainly a significant amount of money, because you're not sure how to free yourself up and have everything working so that you're not a bottleneck. So that was sort of a thought that I had when this whole story was playing out, and everyone's like aghast with how could this possibly happen, right? Like what's wrong with the pilot or the captain of that ship or whatever his title is. And I'm like, wait a second, like we're all doing that in our own way. Yeah, to a certain extent, and you're not seeing it. You're just seeing the physical manifestation because this thing is like all over the news, and you can see it clogging up the canal from satellites in space. Yeah, right. Yeah, but I
heard it was like 40 million an hour being lost.
Huge amounts, right? And nobody's thinking about that. They're only thinking about, okay, like we gotta. We got to go back and forth. Nobody's thinking about, well, what enables that back and forth to happen is that there's a conduit, there's a pathway, there's something that's creating bandwidth, and that's facilitating that commerce. So
and I think the interesting thing as well, putting it into the context of what you're saying, is like you could naively look at that situation, like very naively, but this maybe demonstrates the point. You could look at that and say, well, I mean, yeah, it shouldn't be stuck, and I'm sure it's bad, but it can't be losing that much money. I mean, it's just a boat, like it's just a ship, like stuck. It'll get unstuck at some point, and we can all move on. Right. And I think it's kind of like that in business, isn't it? Like these bottlenecks we're talking about, you won't often immediately associate, or even at any point associate, like the loss that's occurring during that time. You just see it as like, well, that's just how it is right now. We're not losing money. Maybe we're not making as much as we should because of it, but we're not losing. The focus never goes on the loss because it's not always so evident. But I think if you take this scenario with the ship, like, no, money is being lost because business cannot continue. Like it is stuck. Like nothing is flowing here.
It's clogged.
Even though and it's like, so I saw some cruise ships are like, they've made the decision to take a detour. Well, that's a 30-day detour that they've now had to take.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's somehow how business is as well, right? You don't notice the obvious bottleneck or the fact you might be it, and you're looking for alternative solutions when really it's like, well, yes, you can go around it. That's going to take 30 days, or we can fix the bottleneck in maybe 4 days.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're
absolutely. We want to put our attention, run away and feel like we're being productive, or focus and face up to it.
Dude, that's so spot on. And that's what I feel like most people do. They're like, oh, we can't go this way, so we'll just circumnavigate, even though it's going to take longer. It's going to be more expensive. We're going to have to keep doing that thing instead of get the bottleneck out of the way.
Yeah.
Like get the bottleneck out of the way. That's the real problem here.
Yeah. I imagine some people stood there and were like, crap, this ship is stuck. What do we do? And one guy's gone, well, we could go that way and take it that way. And one guy's gone, well, we could go that way as well. And nobody sat there and gone, well, why don't we remove the bottleneck?
Yeah.
It's like we're all looking for the next direction. Like, where do we go now?
Yeah. Get rid of the thing that's slowing you down.
Yes.
So
what a great
critical
way to tap into that news story.
Well, I'm sorry if I stole your thunder today with the neuse, but
you didn't steal the thunder. I mean, we could mask over it, or we could just openly tell the audience that I sucked this week, and I was like, I can't think. I've trolled news for an hour, desperate to, and I already knew about this news story, but you connected the dots.
You got to connect the dots, man. You got to connect the dots. So anyway, that's what we got for you guys today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you guys. Make sure you subscribe, tell your friends about us, leave us a review. And this is James P. Friel signing off with my amazing co-host, Mr. Dean Holland, for another episode of Just the Tips. We will talk with you guys next time. Later, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Just the Tips, where we believe business should be profitable and fun. For show notes, links, and other information on our guests, visit justthetipsshow.com. For more information on how to connect with Dean Holland, visit deanholland.com. And if you'd like to go from being a hustling entrepreneur to an effective CEO, capable of running your company without being stuck in the day-to-day, visit me for free training and resources at jamespfriel.com. Our theme music is Happy Happy Game Show by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license.